Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com. And today we're going to talk about the myth of meritocracy in America. Now, America is supposedly one of the most meritocratic of countries in the world. And that's partly because, as a much younger country, one that was, first settled, then colonized, and so forth, there were a lot of opportunities that simply didn't exist in other much more established countries. The old world versus the new world, etc. My apologies to the Bears. I didn't realize that Owen was back on and streaming. I've written a blog post on this if you want to check it out. But there's a lot more to it than just what that blog post dealt with. Now, the chart that I show here, this is something that was produced by Ron Enns. And he did a review of the elite university undergraduate enrollments, in which he demonstrated rather conclusively that the admissions process in the Ivy League is now so completely statistically out of whack that there is no possibility of claiming that it is based on any sort of merit whatsoever. There's no question about that. And so when you look at what the facts are, when you look at what is actually happening, not just in the Ivy League, but everywhere. I put up a post by Rachel Fulton Brown, a link to a post by her talking about being denied a full professorship at her university. And the thing is that by any reasonable measure, by any statistical measure, she was clearly, she was clearly worthy of becoming a full professor. Her work speaks for itself. And yet, she was denied that, supposedly because her scholarship wasn't good enough. And yet, she was winning awards for her scholarship. She had all kinds of rave reviews for her scholarship. Her publication record was good and all that sort of thing. And yet, how does this happen? Now, part of it, of course, is due to identity. We know that. That's what Ron is talking about. Ron is talking about the way in which the Jewish population of the Ivy League was at one point suppressed. Then, as they managed to get rid of the quotas, they took over the admissions offices, and now they have been, for the past however long it's been, 30, 40 years, they've been practicing their own affirmative action on their own behalf. And that's why they are so wildly overrepresented by a factor of about 10 to 1 than what an actual meritocracy would indicate. And so, and I've seen this. If you happen to be someone who attended either an elite school or a school that is one level down, as I did, I had the option to go to an Ivy League school. My dad was MIT. I was a national merit finalist. So I had full rides pretty much everywhere. I was going to be accepted pretty much anywhere. I was also one of the top sprinters in the state. So I had both the tests and the athletic aspect going for me. In fact, I beat all of the Ivy League sprinters when I went up against them my freshman year. And so, but I chose not to go there. I wanted to go to a party school, and Bucknell was very, very heavily Greek. It was known for being an Ivy League reject school, but a lot of the people that were not actually Ivy League rejects, they just didn't want to go to a school that was full of unattractive women and pompous wannabe snobs. I visited Princeton just because I had the F. Scott Fitzgerald influence, and took one look and said, there is absolutely no way I'm going to spend 4 years here. And so when you look at what's happening, but that's just one aspect. For example, what we're seeing now with the SJW converged institutions is that we are seeing people being denied employment simply because people don't like their ideological views. They don't like their political views. I was talking to a game developer today, and for the second time in my experience, I've seen an employee at a game company with which I'm working kick up a fuss because they don't like me. They don't like what I stand for. They don't like what I say. In both cases, these people have quite correctly had their employment terminated because when it tends to be a matter. In that case, it actually does tend to be, if not fully meritocratic, it does tend to be a matter of status. You're not going to get rid of a talented game designer, because game design talent is relatively rare, in order to please some SJW tester or even programmer for the most part. So when you look at this myth, you need to understand that it is not merely one group that is pushing this myth. It's not merely one group that finds it advantageous to play this game. And the other thing that you need to understand is that it's not normal for there to be a true meritocracy. One of the most, and furthermore, meritocracy is not the proper ideal anyhow. Do you know what was probably the most meritocratic state in human history? It was probably the Chinese Empire during the Mandarin era. If you look at the way that the Chinese bureaucracy depended solely on tests, it was more firmly meritocratic than the United States at its peak meritocracy. And they did not achieve necessarily the most optimal results. They actually, because of the subject matter which the meritocracy was based upon, was largely irrelevant to the advancement of the society. In fact, that particular meritocracy very much led to stasis. And that is also, to a certain extent, what we are likely seeing happening right now in the United States, not because of excess meritocracy, but because of the way that the most dynamic and the most creative and the most original thinkers are being systematically excluded, not just from the elite institutions, but they are being excluded from politics, they're being excluded from business, they're being excluded from the professions. Now, this is really interesting when you think about it, there's an assumption that a lot of people make that the smartest people are the most successful. Generally speaking, that isn't true. And this is something that I deal with in Jordanetics. This is something that I address specifically in Appendix C in a moderate amount of detail. And so when you look at the link between intelligence and IQ, there is actually a statistical link between the two that persists up to about 133 IQ. But what's really fascinating is above 133, which is basically the Mensa level. It's essentially, it's technically 132, I think, but that's the top 2% of the population. Once you get into the top 2% of the population, the link between success, career success, it tends to reverse. And it reverses so dramatically that by the time you get to my IQ level, around 150, 97% of the people are excluded from professional career success. So when you look at people like Owen Benjamin, who has a 3SD plus IQ, when you look at someone like me, who has the same thing, it is very, very normal for us to not have lawyers that you tend to see in professors and so forth. In fact, they did a study of the professors at one of the most elite universities in England, Cambridge University, and the highest IQ that they tested was 139. You tell me what to do, you're gone. All right? And so there's a number of potential reasons for this. One is this theorized communications gap. And there's an idea, and there's some basis for it. It's not something that I would consider to be conclusively proven, but it does make sense. And there are some studies that point this out. And essentially what they say is that it is impossible that if you are above that 133 range, the 2SD range to which you can talk excludes the majority of the people out there. So the sweet spot is to be right at the very top of where you can speak to them. They're very smart boys and they can understand everything. So that when they hear you talking about things that are beyond their capacity to grasp, beyond their ability to understand easily, they just assume that you're crazy or that you're wrong, or that they find it very difficult to understand or to accept that they just don't understand. When you look at the and then the other issue goes beyond this, and this is the idea that there's actually systematic exclusion of the highly intelligent. And when you see how people are treated because they have new ideas, original ideas, they think outside the box, what is the way that people usually react to that stuff? They usually react with anger. They usually react with dislike, maybe sometimes envy. I don't know. I think you need to be cautious about assuming envy and jealousy and that sort of stuff. But for whatever reason, they don't like you being around. It was interesting. My friend who had the 175 IQ always fell into the same pattern of behavior. He would get a job because he needed to earn some money. Within the first week, and he would just take some entry-level position, anything. And he would go ahead and just go to work, do his job, and almost invariably he would notice something that was inefficient. He would notice something that was wrong. He would bring it to the attention of his manager or somebody, and they would be super impressed and super excited about this, and then they would try to promote him, and it would invariably go wrong. Because he had no ability to interact effectively with people of normal intelligence. He actually did better when he was surrounded by the lowest level of people there who had no expectations, didn't care about the fact that he might happen to be smarter than them. I mean, he was a very nice, very humble guy. You can understand with someone like me why my mere existence is offensive to people. I'm arrogant, I'm impatient, I'm intolerant. Of course people don't, like having me around, criticizing them correctly. That's like the last thing they want. It's unpleasant. I respect that. I try to keep myself out of positions and responsibilities where I have to do that. But this guy, he was just really, really nice, really, really humble, and he just couldn't communicate with these folks. Nick says, Vox, just finished your book and the article on Fight Club. I thought they were both hilarious and elucidating. Great job. Regarding this discussion, I am over 150 IQ and get these reactions all the time. Yeah, that's absolutely normal. Almost everyone that I know has these problems except for the people who manage to mask their intelligence either through humor, genuine warmth and humor. My best friend is just as intelligent as I am. Actually, technically, he tests out literally 1 IQ point higher. His favorite game to play is to offer to explain things to me. Like whenever there's something just completely obvious, he'll ask me if I need any help understanding that. So, anyhow, he is a very funny guy. He's the kind of guy who will put on a dress in a heartbeat. He will perform for anyone. He's always happy to play the fool, and he's a complete ham. And the thing that's always annoying to me is that he makes fun of people to their face, but they don't realize it. So, I'm polite and a bit indifferent, and so they think I'm a jerk. And he's making fun of them to their face, being a complete phony, and they're eating it up. They think he's so great, and I'm like, come on. But people who are able to wear the mask of the clown, or alternatively, I've also seen an even smarter individual who has a mask of charisma. I mean, he's literally the most charismatic individual I've ever known. And, I've met numerous people who served under him that I didn't know, that I met them years later, and they invariably said the same thing. I would run into the mouth of a cannon for that man. If he told us to charge hell, we wouldn't even think twice, but these are exceptional people. I mean, they're exceptional squared. And Trump is, I suspect, one of those people as well. Trump has the ability to analyze and think at a very high level, and yet he has the ability to speak at a very, very low common denominator level of rhetoric. And when people talk about Trump and the way that he speaks, and they make fun of it, and they think that it's an indication of a high IQ, they completely miss the point, because the man is highly intelligent, and yet he has the gift of communicating across the communications gap. And that is very, very rare. I can't do it. Most of the highly intelligent people I know cannot do it. And so you just need to grasp that. Sam Harris. Sam Harris. Well, here's the thing, you guys. You can tell very, very easily whether Americans, especially Americans over the age of about 45, are actually in the very high IQ level or not. For example, Hillary Clinton is. Barack Obama is not. Bill Clinton, I believe, is, if I recall correctly. It's very, very simple. All you need to do is look up whether they were national merit semifinalists or not. Because the IQs required they vary from state to state, but the IQ required to qualify for national merit typically puts people above the, I think, 136 level. It can be anywhere from 135 to 140. That's above the Mensa level. So, for example, P.Z. Myers, for all that I think that he's a jackass and he's reliably wrong, he is genuinely intelligent. You can tell he's genuinely intelligent. He's simply not very good at logic, statistics, and math. But he is quite bright, and it's not an accident that he happened to see through Jordan Peterson right away. Because he's national merit. I'm national merit. My best friend's national merit. I mean, I lived in a house where 4 out of the 5 people were all national merit. And so, and there's very, very few people that from, whatever it was, 1950 to 1992, very, very few high IQ people in America missed taking either the PSAT or the SAT. And so, where does one look that up? Well, you don't necessarily, I mean, there's no list. It would be very useful if there was a list. I wish that scientists had access to the national merit data. It only applies to those over 45 or so, because in 1992, they changed the tests so that the SAT and the PSAT ceased to be IQ tests, and they ceased to be aptitude tests, and they became achievement tests. Achievement tests do not measure your intelligence, they just measure what you've learned. They can serve as a proxy of sorts, but it's significantly less valuable and reliable in that regard, so much so that Mensa does not accept SAT scores or PSAT scores as evidence of eligibility for membership post 1992. ACT is, as the name indicates, an achievement test. ACT does not serve as an IQ proxy or as an IQ test. But if you look at, no, don't overrate intelligence. All intelligence is, I've made this analogy before. Intelligence is the size of the gun barrel. It's how big the barrel is. But you still need to know where to point it, how to aim it, and that's wisdom. And you still need ammunition, and the ammunition is information. It's experience. And so, that's why so many genuinely intelligent people do stupid and self-destructive and foolish things. They might have the big caliber gun, but they have no wisdom to aim it. And even if they do have wisdom to aim it, if you have no knowledge, if you have no experience, then you've got nothing to do with it. And I often use the term, not often, but I occasionally use the term, a functional moron. If you don't use your intelligence, if you don't actually focus on the issue, then you might as well be stupid. Because if you're not using your intelligence, you're just functioning without it. Let's see. I did above average in school, but I was incredibly lazy, so high IQ didn't do me much good due to bad habits. That's very, very common. I didn't get good grades, either in high school or in college. I got like a B plus average in high school. I got a perfect, literally 3.00 in university. I didn't care about grades. I didn't go to class, Let's see. IQ, in my opinion, is just pattern recognition. I think that's why it correlates well in math, language, musical ability. You see the pattern in numbers, words, and notes. I think there's an element of truth to that. I don't think it's just pattern recognition, but I think that pattern recognition is one of the most reliable indicators of high intelligence. Somebody said, Tuduk says, I want proof that Owen Benjamin has an IQ of 148. I don't really believe that. Sorry, I think he's likable and funny. I don't think he's extremely clever or fast thinking, though. I totally disagree. I recognize that Owen was quite intelligent, probably almost the first time that I listened to him. You got to keep in mind, comedians do tend to be much more intelligent than the average because they have to process very, very quickly in order to come up with an interpretation that is funny. Owen and I could look at the same thing and he would come up with a funny take on it. He would probably come up with 5 funny takes on it before I would come up with one, even if I did. And so I think that there are different aspects to intelligence and so forth. One of the interesting things that I see that the people who are smarter than I am often tell me is they're a little surprised that my IQ is as low as it is, because my observable pattern recognition skills and ability to analyze things is at a level that they tend to perceive as being more akin to their own. And the answer is pretty simple. I'm totally retarded when it comes to spatial relations. I mean, anything from playing defensive back to going for an overhead in tennis to packing boxes in the back of a car. I'm hopeless. And so, there's different elements. I mean, I don't think that it's, quite as, it's all much more nebulous and holistic and interconnected than we understand presently, obviously, but there's certainly different aspects that different people are good at. There's a young math genius that I know, and a kid that was in his class said, there's 3 types of people in this elite math course. He said there's people like me who have to walk up the mountain on the path, and then there's the math minds, who can, they don't need the path, and they can just climb straight up and get to the top, and they get there faster. He said, and then there's this one kid who's the genius of the class. He's like, he's got a jetpack, and he just flies straight to the top immediately. I mean, it's really crazy. There was a problem that 3 of the kids were working on. It was just this, they wanted to try to prove a mathematical theorem that has never been proved. So they're coming at it with some innovative techniques. And it was so funny because the math genius, like, they've been worked on it for like, weeks. And the math genius takes one look and goes, "This is interesting. I like it. It won't work, but it's interesting." And sure enough, after all the programming and all the running through this stuff and so forth, it's like, yeah, doesn't quite work. So, no, they're not good free IQ tests online. If you want to get your IQ tested, go get it done properly. Let's see. You can tell Big Bear is a good guy. It comes through. Vox 2. I would be careful about appearances. There's a lot of people that think people are good people on the basis of how they present themselves and stuff. I mean, it's nice to think that people are good people, but you need to keep in mind that the worst people spend a tremendous amount of energy and effort trying to convince you that they're good people. Isn't IQ overrated? I guess it depends on how you rate it. I mean, by whom? Don't underestimate guitarists, the high-level ones at least. Yeah, I would say the same thing. And in fact, actually 2 of the math kids that I'm talking about are both guitarists, now that I think about it. Thoughts on the philosopher Plotinus? I've read an amount of his work, but not very much. So I don't think that I have any relevant thoughts. Are high IQ people loners? They're more likely to be. I mean, it's just harder to talk to people, and it's harder to find people who share your interests. Most of the really smart people that I know tend to, get peopled out. And my wife knows that I'm good for about 90 minutes at the full engaged level. I can go about 2 hours, and then after 2 hours, if I can disappear, I will. There's nothing. I mean, to me, one of the greatest inventions of the modern era is the ebook. I love being able to, read the new Murakami novel on my phone when I, want to go not be around people or something. Let's see. Do people vary by evil quotient and where in that scale? I don't think we have an evil quotient. Vox, did you ever discuss Jordan B. Peterson's proposed hunger strike if arrested and jailed for hate speech? No. Jordan Peterson is not going to be arrested and jailed for hate speech. That's just a ludicrous posturing on his part. Gavin McInnes spends a lot of time virtue signaling, it seems. Well, that's what happens when you're a coward. What do they say? The coward dies 1,000 deaths. The hero dies but once. Once you cuck, they know you will, and they will continue to put you under pressure for it. That's why you don't apologize, you don't cuck, you don't back down. I could be mistaken, but I believe you've spoken about playing D&D sometime in the past. I was never a D&D player, really. I mean, I played it like 2 or 3 times at a friend's house. I was more of a I was more of a Traveller reader. I never really played Traveller except, by myself. But I had a lot of the books and I enjoyed reading them. Has a Bear Darkstream been scheduled yet? Not yet. We'll do it when Owen's schedule allows. That is true. I am less a role player and much more of a war gamer. Which ebook do you use? I prefer Aldico Premium on the Android. I still sympathize with Gavin. He's been physically threatened to the point where most people would cuck out. I don't sympathize with him at all. He's barely been threatened at all. Starting 17 years ago, I got over 100 death threats from the Council on American Islamic Relations, from members of that. I was the subject of their weekly or their daily email bombing. There's no excuse for it. Sympathizing with somebody doing something objectively stupid is not a wise idea. The fact that he did that means that they are going to use the same tactic against him until he wises up. Let's see. Oh, Gavin absolutely did cuck. When he quit the Proud Boys and abandoned his own followers, that was worse than the average cucking by far. Thoughts on the band Tool? They're okay. Let's see here. Will the wall be built before 2020? I hope so. I don't know. Have you seen the wealth of Big Bear Xbox Day fan fiction? Oh, good Lord. No. Have you ever played Ages of Empire? I played the first one, I think. It's okay. I'm not a big fan of real-time strategy. I prefer turn-based strategy. Let's see. Are you a Radiohead fan? No. Will the collapse of America be financial or purely ethnic racial strife? It's going to be both. The financial strife will set off the identity strife. What would you speculate Norm Macdonald's IQ? I don't know him well enough to have any idea. He's always struck me as being more intelligent than the rest of the SNL crew that he was around. Let's see. What's your take on Stefan's research on how war comes from childhood experience? I think it's, I have not seen any of it. It strikes me at first glance as being absolutely and utterly absurd. But maybe he can build a case for it. It would certainly be interesting to see. What's Milo's next move? I don't know. Let's see. Are any of the disadvantages of extremely high IQ inherent to its magnitude, or are they solely a byproduct of being highly deviant in relative terms? Yeah, I think the communications gap is inherent to the magnitude. I heard students at my school calling Proud Boys KKK today. Well, that's exactly why it's totally pointless to try to virtue signal. You can deny whatever you want to deny. That's why I don't bother saying, "Oh, I'm not alt-right the way that you define it, because I totally disagree with Richard Spencer about practically everything." The idea that the alt-right ideology is broad enough to encompass everything from Richard Spencer to me is absurd. You might as well just throw communists in there and while you're at it, But I never back away from it. I never run away from it. I now prefer the term nationalist right because that's more precise, that's more accurate. I mean, alt-right just means alternative. It means the alternative right. All it was, as far as I was concerned, is a way of distinguishing the nationalist right from the American conservative movement and from the libertarian movement. It's very important, because I was formerly a small L libertarian. But a more accurate term, having nothing to do with what other people are saying, just in terms of a more dialectically accurate term, nationalist right is the correct way to see it. What is the right? What is the true right? The true right is, in historical terms, God, King, country, God, King, nation. And so we don't have a king, but we have God and we have nations. So if you are religious and you support nationalism, then you are obviously of the nationalist right. Now, you can be of the nationalist right if you're an atheist or agnostic or whatever, but I think what you will often find is that those people will tend to be a little bit more friendly to some of the arguments and ideas and policies that are of the left, because the true left, the far left, is not atheist. It's actually intrinsically satanic, because at the end of the day, if you boil things down sufficiently to their absolute root core, you can philosophically it all comes down to Plato versus Aristotle. In a spiritual sense, it all comes down to God versus Satan. Things like atheism, things like Nietzscheism in the philosophical sense, these are just way stations. Why support white nationalism if you admit that white does not refer to a natural kind? Well, that's the thing. Technically, if you want to be technical, I don't support white nationalism because white is not a nation. That's one of those that's one of those things where you have to be clear about, are we speaking rhetorically or are we speaking dialectically? In a dialectical sense, I don't believe white nationalism even exists. I think that it is like saying yellow nationalism. There's no such thing as yellow nationalism. There's no such thing as white nationalism. There's no such thing as black nationalism. The only reason we even have this perception of white nationalism is because of the United States being confused about its own identity. God, nation, family. I mean, I think that's correct. I think that that's the ideal way to look at it in the modern sense. God, nation, family. That is the true right. That is the core of the nationalist right. People like my library. I do have a great library. The green books are the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, which was a gift from a Italian reader. It was a really kind of him. His father died and had 3 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica, including the 1911, which I wanted because that's the best version. The animatronic, you misunderstood me. You lost me at Plato equals Satan. No, I was making an analogy. I said in the philosophical sense, the root is Plato versus Aristotle. In the spiritual sense, it's God versus Satan. Now, if you are philosophically inclined to Platonism, you are probably going to be inclined to the satanic side, but not necessarily, because religion is not philosophy. Again, we're just talking about pattern recognition here. We're not talking about a causal relationship between being a Platonist and being opposed to the Christian God. Let's see. White nationalism is like La Raza, both garbage. We Hispanics don't all love each other, so it won't work. But again, where does Hispanics come from? Hispanics does not come from any of the quote-unquote Hispanic nations. It comes from the United States, again. Do you play chess? Yes, but not very well. Let's see. Sidekick Bear is a brown nationalist, no doubt. What about Christian nationalism? Is that a banner that can succeed? Well, inside the nation, yes. But, I mean, I'm a Christian nationalist, but there is no Christian nation of this world, by definition. I mean, Jesus Christ specifically said, God's kingdom is not of this world. How do you properly read and take notes, or don't you? Well, that's why I love Aldico. The one thing I don't like about Aldico is that they let you take highlights, which is fantastic. I love it. But what they don't do is they don't have any way for you to export the highlights. If they would just allow you to export your highlights to a text file, it'd be brilliant. That's all I want. The other actually, I forgot to mention the other e-reader I like. I use Moonreader in combination with the Gold Dictionary because that has a really great Italian to English dictionary. So that's what I use when I read Italian books on my tablet. I use Moonreader because then I can, if I don't know a word, I can look it up very quickly. Is snitching justified if you were doing it to fight liberals? Yes. Do you think you will complete the system of German idealism? No. How can a person tell if they're a gamma or not? I think the best way is probably to ask your friends. Ask your friends, am I reliably honest, or am I often deluding myself? Am I honest with you, or do you think that I tend to exaggerate and posture? If you just want to look at yourself, do you find it easy to accept your place in the social hierarchy, or do you have a tendency to fantasize about being more successful than you are? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing. If you tend to fantasize that you're more successful than you are, there's a very good chance that you're a gamma. Yeah, if you think you might be gamma, you probably are. That is a pretty reasonable heuristic. Is anarchism valid? No. What version of the Bible do you prefer? I mostly read an Italian one, to be honest with you, these days. But in general, I would say I usually prefer the NIV for just casual reading. Do you think Americans would benefit from learning their ancestral languages? Yes, definitely. I think you should. I've even learned a bit of my native Indian language. Yeah, look at your woman. If she's not hotter than you, you're probably gamma. What do you think of monarchism? I think that it's probably preferable to democracy. Do you put any stock in Niccolo Machiavelli? I think he's useful for analyzing the powerful of the world. I think that his views on war are laughable. I actually write about it in The Irrational Atheist. One of the notable Italian condottieri of the day allowed him to try to put his ideas into practice with the mercenary company that the condottieri commanded, and he just made a complete cock-up of it. And that was pretty funny. I think it was Giovanni of the Black Band, if I recall correctly. Do you think Western Europe can turn the birth rate around? Yes. Do you think it's a good idea to join the military? Depends on the military, but probably not the U.S. military. Do you get tired of the same questions? Yes. What do you think about Orthodox Christianity? I have a lot of respect for it. but I don't think it's the answer to the problems of the West. Let's see. Okay. What are the most significant differences between gammas and omegas? Gammas are part of the social hierarchy. Omegas are not. A gamma would get an invite to the party. The omega would not. Let's see. Vox is the king of the Q&A. I try. Let's see. How can direct democracy work well? Well, it may not work well, but it'll work a lot better than indirect democracy, because with indirect democracy, you impose a level of sociopathy in between, and also a layer of insulation in between the voter and the consequences. In the case of direct democracy, you're going to fail faster, which is always desirable. What do you do as a gamma to improve yourself? Go to Alpha Game and look up Graduating Gamma. It's a 4-part series written by a delta who used to be a pretty big gamma. And the way it all starts is stop lying. Stop lying to yourself. Stop lying to others. Tell the truth, especially when telling the truth hurts you. Were you an omega before you were a sigma? Yes. I mean, in case it's not clear, I don't play well with others. I don't know how to play well with others for the most part. I've learned how to work well with others. I've learned how to do projects with others, but I will never be comfortable in a social hierarchy. It's just not in the cards. Thoughts on evolution? I'm a skeptic. You can look it up on there's dozens of blog posts on it on the blog. Before I go now, I should mention 2 things. First of all, if you have read Alt Hero number 5, please consider doing a review of it tonight. We'd like to see up to 25 reviews of it up there soon. For some reason, people are saying that this is the best Alt Hero yet, and yet there's only 5 reviews up there. So if you've bought it and read it, or if you're a backer of Alt Hero and you've read it, then I would encourage you to post a review of it on Amazon at your earliest convenience. Secondly, I would be remiss if I did not encourage you to pick up the paperback of Jordanetics. You can get it for $19.99 at Amazon, or you can go to Castalia Direct and pick it up for $14.99, I believe. So it's a devastating demolition of both Jordan Peterson's philosophy and Jordan Peterson's character. There's some people that have been trying to take it apart. They haven't even read it. It is very, very difficult for anyone who actually reads this book to take Jordan Peterson seriously or at face value ever again. And if you've read it, like Jilly Bear says she's absolutely loving it, that's great. But I encourage you again. One of the best things and the most important things that you can do if you want to take part in the culture war is review these things on Amazon. And don't just say, oh, this was great, I liked it. Just put a paragraph or 2 together and go into a little bit of detail, because people really do read these reviews, and it really does make a big impression on people. That's why the SJWs go to the trouble of writing fake reviews and posting them up there, because they know they can have an effect. So anyhow, thanks so much for tuning in. Remember that meritocracy is a myth, particularly in America, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream.